The heavy oak door finally groaned open. My father, Richard, stood there with a glass of vintage scotch. A look of annoyance twisting his features, until he saw who was standing behind me. The color drained from his face, turning a sickly shade of grey that matched the winter sky. "Vivian!" he gasped, the glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble floor. "The locks change tomorrow, Richard," Vivian said, her voice like cracking ice. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped over the threshold, followed by the two lawyers. Beatrice and Kayla froze at the top of the stairs, their faces pale as they realized the servant was no longer alone. One of the lawyers stepped forward, pulling a stack of notarized documents from his briefcase. As of midnight, Ilara reached her 21st birthday. Per the terms of her mother's trust, full ownership of this estate, and the liquid assets you've been managing, has transferred to her. You have exactly 1 hour to pack 3 suitcases each. Anything else left in this house remains the property of the trust. The perfect dinner party turned into a whirlwind of panicked whispers and frantic packing. My father tried to bluster, to shout about family loyalty, but Vivian simply pointed to the stack of 144 intercepted letters sitting on the coffee table. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. By 1 a.m., the man who had locked me out in the cold was standing on that same porch, clutching a single suitcase and watching the gates of his stolen kingdom close for good. Inside, the house felt different, warm, for the first time in a decade. Vivian handed me a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a gold locket. I pressed the clasp, and there she was, my mother, laughing in the sunlight. "She knew you'd find your way back to us," Vivian whispered. I looked out the window at the falling snow. I wasn't the girl shivering on the porch anymore. I was the woman holding the keys. If this story reminded you that your value isn't defined by how people treat you, drop a stay strong in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and reclaimed lives. Underneath that single photograph in the hidden box lay the most devastating discovery of all, a stack of 144 letters. One for every single month I had been told Vivian was dead. I sat on the cold basement floor, my hands trembling as I realized every birthday card, every "I love you," and every invitation to come home had been intercepted. My father hadn't just lied about her death, he had been systematically erasing her existence while pocketing the generous allowance check she sent to support my upbringing. But as I dug deeper into the faded envelopes, I found a legal document that turned my world upside down. This house, the grand estate with the crystal chandeliers and the velvet curtains, wasn't my father's. It was held in a trust established by my mother, managed by Vivian until my 21st birthday. My father was nothing more than a temporary tenant who had overstayed his welcome by a decade. I spent the next month playing the part of the invisible servant, waiting for the clock to strike midnight on my 21st birthday, Christmas Eve. When I stood in the living room that night and asked why there wasn't a single gift for me under the tree, I wasn't being needy. I was testing him one last time. When Richard laughed, grabbed my arm, and shoved me out into the -15-degree night without a coat. He didn't realize he was sealing his own fate. Now, back on the porch, the limousine door swung open. Vivian stepped out, her eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, protective fire I hadn't seen in 12 years. She didn't look at the house. She looked at me. "I told you I would find you, little star," she whispered, her voice cutting through the wind like a warm blade. She wasn't alone. Behind her, 2 men in dark suits stepped out, carrying briefcases that held the power to dismantle my father's entire life in seconds. To understand how I ended up a frozen ghost on my own porch, we have to go back to when the sky turned the color of iron. 12 years ago, at my mother's funeral, I was a terrified 9-year-old staring at a mahogany casket. My grandmother, Vivian, was the only one who touched me that day. She knelt in the grass, smelling of jasmine and old paper, and whispered 5 words that would haunt me: "I will always find you, little star." But my father, Richard, stepped between us like a steel wall. He blamed her for my mother's death and banished her on the spot. Within a month, he had effectively erased our past. We moved to a new town, got a new number, and I watched him toss my mother's address book into the trash. He told me it was just us now, and I believed him because he was the only world I had left. 2 years later, the cage grew even smaller when he brought home Beatrice and her daughter, Kayla. Within a week, Kayla took my sun-drenched bedroom, and I was relocated to the basement, a damp space with a cot and a water stain on the ceiling shaped like a fist. I became the house's invisible engine, cooking, cleaning, and ironing while Beatrice told guests I was just a selfless little helper. I lived that lie until a cold November night during my junior year of college. While searching for a blanket behind the water heater, I found a hidden cardboard box. Inside was my mother's silk scarf and a photograph of her laughing with Vivian at a party. On the back, it read, "Vivian's 60th birthday." My blood ran cold. My father told me Vivian had died of a heart attack before I was even born. But the digital timestamp on the photo proved she was very much alive long after my mother died. He hadn't just lost a relative, he had stolen my family. But the photo was just the beginning. What was hidden in the stack of 144 letters my father never wanted me to see? And what happens when the legal owner of the house finally decides to come home? I stood barefoot in 6 inches of fresh snow, my breath hitching in the -15-degree air, while my father toasted to his perfect family just inches away behind a double-paned glass window. It was 11:14 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and while 25 guests inside laughed and clinked expensive crystal, I was being systematically erased. My name is Alara, and I was locked out of my own home because I had the audacity to ask why there wasn't a single gift under that 9-foot tree with my name on it. My stepmother, Beatrice, was busy slicing into a decadent 3-layer cake, and my stepsister, Kayla, looked me dead in the eye through the frost, blew a mocking kiss, and yanked the velvet curtains shut. I honestly thought this was the moment my life ended. My toes were turning a ghostly white, and the shivering had finally stopped, which I knew from biology class was a terrifying sign. But just as the darkness started to feel heavy, a pair of piercing headlights cut through the blizzard. A sleek, black limousine glided to the curb, and the woman who stepped out was someone my father had spent 13 years convincing me was dead. He told me she didn't care if I lived or died, but as she walked toward me in a white cashmere coat, I realized the man I called Dad had been building a cage around me since the day my mother was buried. My father thought he was the king of this castle, but he was about to find out he didn't even own the dirt it was built on. To understand how I ended up freezing on that porch, we have to go back to the day the lies began, and the secret box hidden behind a water heater that changed everything.